Good evening and welcome to the new BUGAJSKI hour. I am happy to be back in Prishtinë to examine important global and local developments that affect the lives of all Kosovars. And today on the BUGAJSKI hot seat, I will be looking at Kosovo's European dimension with my special guest Dhurata Hoxha, Kosovo's Minister for European Union Integration. But first, my political commentary on a key international topic is entitled Why Moscow Fears NATO. Moscow has manufactured a thick mist of disinformation about NATO in order to disguise its expansionist policies in Europe. Nonetheless, lurking behind this propaganda offensive is a genuine fear that the North Atlantic Alliance will thwart Kremlin ambitions and weaken the Vladimir Putin regime. Russia's officials contend that NATO captured the post-communist countries and threatens Russia's borders. In reality, NATO enlargement has been a voluntary process, and no country has voiced claims to Russia's territory. Above all, NATO's doctrine, military posture, and force dispositions are not a threat to Russia's integrity. But the Kremlin has a troika of fears about NATO, although these do not revolve around Russia's security. They are based on anxieties about the future of the Putin administration. In the first place, Putin has anchored the domestic legitimacy on restoring Russia's great power status and reining in neighbors. Such ambitions are blocked when aspirants enter NATO and benefit from its core principles of mutual defense. Although Russian security is not challenged by any country's accession to NATO, Moscow's ability to control their security and foreign policy is largely thwarted. The second fear is that NATO is a source of attraction for other post-Soviet states, including Russia's allies. Unlike NATO, Moscow's alliances are not voluntary, but consist of countries trapped in dependency relations based on blackmail, bribery, and threat. In seeking independence, several capitals have turned to Western institutions for help and protection. When they do, Moscow inverts reality by claiming that it is being surrounded by enemies and needs to combat them. Third, and most important, Moscow fears NATO as the security core of Europe's development that challenges the credibility of Russia's dictatorship. For Kremlin officials, an independent, democratic, economically stable, and internationally integrated Ukraine symbolizes everything that threatens their hold on power. A successful Ukrainian model of development would expose the Russian model as a failure and inspire dozens of impoverished federal regions within Russia to seek greater control over their own destiny by opposing the hyper-centralized Moscow regime. From the outset, relations between NATO and Russia have been based on false premises. Putin's Moscow does not see NATO as a potential partner, but as its primary rival, territorial competitor, and existential political threat. NATO must develop a new realism towards Moscow, one that is not based on grand bargains or power balances, but on upholding the principles on which NATO was founded: the defense of democracies and effective opposition to any power that seeks to dominate Europe. It is time now for the BUGAJSKI hot seat with my special guest, Dhurata Hoxha, Kosovo's Minister for European Union Integration. Thank you, Dhurata, for joining me on the show this evening.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We're going to be looking at all things European Union. There's a lot of ground to cover, a lot of developments. Let me start, though, with the most recent European Commission report on the Western Balkans, which is subtitled A Credible Enlargement Perspective and Enhanced EU Engagement. How important do you think is this document? Does it break any new ground for the Balkan region, for Kosovo in particular?
I think this document should be seen positively, or as we say, the notion of glass half full. Why I'm saying this? Because for the first time, even in the front page of the strategy, we talk about, or the strategy talks about 6 Western Balkan countries, which means Kosovo is included equally as the other Western Balkan countries, which for me is a recognition in itself. When we have in mind the 5 non-recognizers in EU and no kind of like consensual opinion about Kosovo. The other 2 really important aspects which we see in this strategy and which should be really stressed out as very positive is that the path, European Union path integration of Kosovo is separated now from Serbia. So we have 2 separated journeys into EU as 2 independent countries, which again in itself is de facto a recognition. And then the other third very important element of this strategy is that there is a very specific wording on the dialogue or normalization of relations, that Serbia and Kosovo should dialogue and reach a full normalization of relations and come to a legally binding agreement which would enable, even for the other countries in the Western Balkan countries, not one can prevent the other one from joining EU. If that happens, you know, one before the other. So these are really 3 positive elements that I view. Of course, we have hoped for a more specific, more concrete language, which would really provide, so to say, milestones, even for Kosovo, like a candidacy status or something, you know, more specific that would have been mentioned there. But then, in general, I see this as a very positive development, and it's building up to a new momentum for the Western Balkans. And if we use this opportunity, I think the region will be far more, will have a far more greater chance for stability, but also faster progress into EU.
I wanted to get back to the Kosovo-Serbia relationship because I think that's one of the key questions for the future of both countries vis-a-vis EU. But do you think the document itself, I think it states that the first new members could be admitted by 2025, which is in 7 years' time. Do you think it gives more, let's say, acceleration, more momentum to the enlargement process?
I think it does, because for the first time we see a window of opportunity. We see the open door, and it's up to us, to the Western Balkan countries, and even it's up to Kosovo if we want to pass through that door. Obviously, we know the criteria, we know the reforms that are attached to the journey of accession, to the accession process, and there are many reforms that we need to do. However, the way I view it is, if we do our homework and we are ready by 2025, then that doesn't mean that it's an individual path for everyone. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the countries that are front runners now don't catch up with the other countries that are, you know, working on their path to EU integration. So in my view, in terms of Kosovo specifically, we have time and we can accelerate our speed of the reforms, and then we can catch up as well. Because if we look at this larger context, Kosovo is the last to sign the SAA agreement. We just had, you know, 2 years of ratification of the SAA agreement that entered into force. So we are kind of like the last country that is joining this EU path. So there will be a lot of homework, a lot of things that we need to do, a lot of reform, but I think the size of our country can turn into our advantage. So we can really speed up the process, because it's not that we have a large bureaucracy, that it's an old dinosaur, that it's very difficult to turn around. It's fairly easy to make decisions if we have the consensus, which we have, because Euro-Atlantic integration is the one of the kind of like visionary things where we never lost sight and we never lost vision and consensus, national consensus of all the leaders, of all the political parties, even the citizens. So I think we can do that.
As you said regarding Serbia, Serbia is at the top of the ladder together with Montenegro, the EU ladder, because they have candidate status, they've started accession talks. Kosovo's somewhere at the beginning. It's just taken its first baby steps, if you like. But do you think, and again, it depends how you look at it, do you think Serbia's admission into the EU before Kosovo will be counterproductive? In other words, that there's a possibility that they could block Kosovo's entry once they're in?
Of course, there is always this concern, and the best way forward would be for the whole 6 Western Balkans to join together at the same time. And if we can have some sort of like, developments in the region, or even, support from all EU member countries, but also ourselves to take our part of the obligation, to do our part of the job, and be ready, all together and catch up one another, that would really be a stabilizing factor if all the 6 countries join. However, we understand that it's individual path based on individual merits. Right. So in my view, obviously we don't have many details for this international, legal binding agreement, but for us, for Kosovo, it's recognition, mutual recognition of Kosovo's independence, and not hindering, strong guarantees that Serbia will not hinder not only EU's accession of Kosovo, Kosovo's EU accession, but also to other international organizations as well. Like, we also aim to become a full member of UN, and if we reach the mutual recognition between Serbia, I think that will make things easier even in the international scene, and will prevent these challenges that we have with some of the recognitions from other countries that we face.
Right.
Yeah.
There is some statement in the Commission document in which they say that special arrangements must be put in place to ensure that future member states are not in a position to block the accession of other candidates. I presume that was put in to refer to the Serbia-Kosovo relationship.
I think it's not just only Serbia and Kosovo, because we have also Bosnia, and then we
Greece
have
and
seen,
Macedonia. Yeah.
We unfortunately have seen also the Srpska Krajina issues underdeveloping, and some of the aspirations, so to say. And then we have Macedonia, and then all of the countries in one way or another can or may have issues or reasons to prevent one another. Now, obviously, down the line, it's not that we can hope that there is this positive feeling that none of the countries will do that. So this language, which is very specific in the strategy, is very positive and very assuring, because really, what's the incentive for each one of us to get to the door, and then the other who gets there first and enters the EU stops the others or prevents the others and uses the leverage. And unfortunately, I think the EU here has learned its lesson as well, because we have seen in the past these issues resurface even within EU members currently. And so I guess this is why they have put this language, so that none of the Western Balkan countries can prevent the other from joining, which in our case, for specifically Kosovo, is obviously very positive news. But then in my view, it needs to go further than that. It really needs to be a full normalization, which for us is a full recognition, and then also not hindering, not putting obstacles in our membership processes to international organizations.
I think it would have been even better if the document stated that all EU member states, whether current or future, don't block, because we have this problem, as you know, between Greece and Macedonia.
That would have been a revolution, I would say, in the writing process of the strategy in itself, but even within the EU institutions and within the EU decision-making process. Because for us specifically, we have extra challenges of the 5 or from the 5 non-recognizers. Some of them, we must be very frank here, some of them are very constructive and very supportive of EU integration aspirations and ambitions of Kosovo. And then there are some who are quite rigid in their stance, which is very unfortunate, because there's no other comparison that would especially in their internal situations of those countries, that would make Kosovo a comparable case, because we know the history. Now we are in the eve of, we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of independence of Kosovo, which is a decade full of successes, I would say. We are a success story of a joint partnership between the international community and Kosovars. And it's a tremendous work that has been put in place, and it has really stabilized the region. And I think that even the membership, EU membership, and this perspective, so to say, EU is kind of like the light at the end of the tunnel for all of us, for all the Western Balkans, and it adds to this internal stability, and it adds to the regional stability as well, because we all aspire to become EU members. So for us, it's really important that we nurture the relationship with even with the 5 non-recognizers. And then on the other hand, as much as we provide arguments that we are worthy of EU integration, we build this momentum by reforming, by strengthening the rule of law and conducting reforms in every aspect and every segment of the integration process. Then we provide arguments that we really want this, you know, and I don't think that, you know, there is a country that would prevent another country to prosper. So.
Good point. Of those 5 non-recognizers, there are 2 in particular that may be the longest holdouts. Let's put it this way, I do believe that Slovakia, Romania and even Greece are more likely to recognize sooner. But you have a problem with Cyprus because of its own problems, if you like, with partition. It's an ongoing standoff with the northern part of Cyprus, Turkish-controlled Cyprus, but also Spain. Let me ask you about Spain. Has Spain drawn what I hear sometimes, a red line at Kosovo's entry into the EU as an independent state, apparently due to its own problems with Catalonia?
We keep hearing this as well, although I must say for the Stabilization and Association Agreement, we really had a very constructive approach and support from all the 5 non-recognizers, including Spain. And we were able to get and sign the SAA agreement, so negotiate it, ratify it, and now it has entered into force. However, as the political developments changed in Spain, we see that the Spain has become, you know, or is talking about these, you know, different red lines that you mentioned. And in my view, this is, Spain shouldn't parallel itself or compare itself with the situation of Kosovo and Serbia, because we have a horrible, terrible history of atrocities, of war, of killings, I mean, attempted genocide. And Spain never did that. Spain doesn't have a dictator like Milosevic was, and doesn't use its state apparatus or law enforcement, paramilitary forces to do whatever the Serbs did to Kosovo. And I don't think that there should be this comparison, because I mean, even from 1989, you know, there was this apartheid going on in Kosovo. We were expelled from our jobs, from our schools, I mean, let's not delve into history because it's the 10th anniversary of Kosovo's independence, but really, I mean, it's a totally different case. And Kosovo, besides, we were also a part, and even the International Court has ruled that we had the right, according to the international law, to secede, because we were a part of the federal, we were a federal unit, and we were part of Yugoslavia, which again broke up, and you know, now it's, you know, different countries. Right. So I don't see the parallel in here, and not many people see. So it's, I think even for Spain, it would be dangerous to compare itself, or you know, with this parallel. We understand obviously the concerns that Spain has, and we were also very cautious and you know, in this issue, not to limit ourselves and comment, you know, about these developments in Spain, but really I think that once we also progress in the dialogue with Serbia and we obtain the end goal of the dialogue, which again, to repeat, it's the recognition, I think the arguments will go away, because if, you know, 2, let's say, countries can find peace and can find, you know, sign a peace deal and recognize one another, then what are the arguments for the other countries that didn't or don't even share the same history that we share with Serbia, which is not really a good story or a good history.
Exactly, and we discussed a little bit before the program that if the Spanish are holding out, why didn't the British? They have a Scottish question. Every country has its own sub-regional, let's say, question, whether autonomy, independence, and so forth, which hasn't prevented them from recognizing Kosovo. But let me ask you about the other 4 countries that don't recognize. Do you maintain good relations with these capitals, Cyprus, Slovakia, Romania, Greece?
We have very good, pragmatic, and good relations. We had also official, state visits, exchanges with Slovakia, with other countries, Greece as well, and they have been very forthcoming in supporting Kosovo in general. For example, they recognize our passports. We have liaison offices here based in Prishtina, and we're further, obviously, always looking out for ways that we can strengthen these relationships. And obviously, one other step is to look at avenues which are not really political, but it's, because it's EU or economy that made EU very successful in a way. Interdependency or intercooperation between the countries in terms of economic development and economic support and cooperation. So we view that as much as we can cooperate with one another, even with the non-recognizers, perhaps we can strengthen bilateral relations in terms of economy, and then further those. But in general, we really do enjoy good, very positive, pragmatic relations. We had Foreign Minister of Slovakia visiting Kosovo Foreign Minister and other dignitaries visited Slovakia. We have our people attending the GLOBSEC security conference there and being invited and so on and so forth.
In Bratislava,
and Greece as well, the same. Romania, it's, there is still room for improvement, but it's not, as rigid as I would say with Spain. And so there is this leverage that we must use to develop further ties with the non-recognizer. But I think
Cyprus?
it will, Cyprus as well, it's a bit difficult as well. But then again, we must use all the leverage we can, because once we have this agreement in place between Kosovo and Serbia, in my view, you can only resist so much, but if we manage to find a common point of fully recognizing one another, then why can't the other countries, which is basically not in their backyard in a way? So I'm optimistic that we will find ways, but also, we must break into these countries through our partnerships, through different initiatives, with the help of the allies and partners and many different. So it should be kind of like a joint venture of EU as well, to find a way to leverage better relations with these non-recognizers.
Right. Going back to Serbia, I know the Commission document stresses the importance of settling relations with neighbors, and it talks about this comprehensive, legally binding normalization agreement between 2 countries. What would be the essential elements of that, do you think?
Well, the essential elements obviously would be recognition,
mutual
in
recognition.
itself, mutual recognition. The other essential element or must-have element, I would say, would be that Serbia doesn't prevent or doesn't hinder the process of membership to all international organizations, because although we have an April 2013 agreement which comes from the dialogue, the other many rounds of dialogues, and the final point of this agreement has a wording like Serbia agrees not to impede the process of membership of Kosovo in international organizations. It continues to do so even today. We have the issue with UNESCO, we have the issue with Interpol, and many different very, important organizations which add to the stability of the region in itself as well. And then we have, these obstacles constantly being put in our way, and very active lobbying against our memberships. So we need to ensure that the agreement really consists of clear safeguards that Serbia will not continue to do so, even after the agreement enters into force and is, signed. And the third element, I think the biggest one would be, and should be, and this is obviously just my personal view, but in general we share this view in Kosovo in general amongst the politicians, it should be full UN membership. Mm-hmm. Now obviously we understand also the complexity of this issue, but we should find a way to enable this. And it's not impossible if we all find this political willingness and, we convince our friends, Serbia convinces their friends to move ahead in this issue.
Well, you could have a situation actually where Serbia may let's say, agree to it, but a certain country to the east won't. Because it's to Russia's advantage, obviously, to block Serbia. But let me ask you the other 2 points that you made. Could you have one without the other? In other words, could you have Serbia not blocking Kosovo's progress towards international institutions without full recognition of Kosovo's independent state?
I think actually the most important one is the recognition. Mm-hmm. Because, and I don't see a way that one without the other can exist or can work out. Why I'm saying this? Because without the recognition, we would still have this argument, even from the non-recognizers, that who have constantly repeated to us that when you find, when you progress in dialogue, or some of the countries are quite ready to recognize us, but then they wait, what's happening? And if we have this mutual recognition in place, this is kind of like a closed chapter. It would be a closed chapter between the two countries, and we would really anchor the peace and stability for the region when this is done. And then it would be that sole argument of mutual recognition that would enable us to join membership and to join different international organizations. For example, just a case in point, like we are, even the Western Balkans in general, we are constantly asked to improve and strengthen the rule of law. But then, how can we do that if we are prevented to become members of Interpol, Europol, Eurojust? And these are all different and very important organizations that help countries to exchange information and fight crime. The criminals don't look at the non-recognition part or borders and things like that. They cooperate quite well together. They don't care who's who or from which country.
The best inter-ethnic organizations,
yes.
right?
So we need to do the same. And we see that this is actually in some aspects preventing us to yield better results in strengthening the rule of law. So there are really some very simple issues which affect day-to-day life of people, improve the life of the people and well-being of the people. And then we see that, Serbia continuously disrupts this or hinders this. So it's very important that both go in hand.
Yeah, I agree with you. The problem for Serbia is, of course, so much has been invested, as you said, in blocking Kosovo's international recognition, preventing Belgrade itself from recognizing it as an independent state. It's going to take a lot of courage from any Serbian government to if you like, bite the bullet, to go that one step further.
It is, but I mean, now that there is a clear wording in the EU strategy, I guess it enables them as well to, or it will make it easier for them as well to go this extra mile, so to say, or to take that extra step, the final step, to the full recognition. Because, I mean, we just, months ago, we had the justice integration, and we have Serb judges, Serb prosecutors working in the north, and the courts in the north according to the constitution and laws of the Republic of Kosovo.
Right.
They signed up to that. And obviously we understand the complexity of the issue, and we understand that several times it has been cancelled because we were ready as Kosovo 2 years ago for this to happen. And it continuously didn't happen, and it continuously went being postponed because Serbia and Belgrade were, basically ordering, so to say, these people from the north not to do that. And I think the time has come to really let the Serbs in Kosovo decide for themselves, because we see the willingness of them, that they want to be integrated. For example, the laws, the constitution of Kosovo are quite advanced in providing them rights. I mean, we mark the 10th anniversary, and in some of the regional countries, they are still discussing the laws about languages or enabling communities of those countries to talk in their own language. Whereas in Kosovo, we have a law, we have the constitution, we have the laws which guarantee from 1999 freedom of speech to all the communities that live in Kosovo. We have 3 official languages: Albanian, Serbian, and Turkish. Plus the English, which unofficially is becoming the official language in Kosovo, and all the legal acts, everything is being translated into these languages. So I don't think that there are arguments to say that Serbs in Kosovo are being, whatever the arguments that Serbia is using. They really do have full rights and full opportunities as equal citizens, which they are with our constitution, and to enjoy and embrace those rights. Because, I mean, obviously, we have challenges which everybody else has in Kosovo, but together we can solve and go ahead with this. So Serbia should stop interfering, and we see this every day, especially now in the eve of the 10th anniversary. We see different really, even fake news and different statements. We just look for a way to trigger, unrest or to destabilize the country. And my take on that is we're not going anywhere. We're independent, and we're here to stay.
Okay. Further on relations with European Union states, we've talked about the non-recognizers, we've talked about obviously the key countries, Germany, France, and so forth. What about Britain, now that it's leaving the European Union? Britain has always been a very strong supporter of Kosovo, Kosovo's independence, Kosovo's membership of the European Union, and so forth. Now with Britain outside the EU over the next however long it takes, will that weaken Kosovo's position?
I mean, obviously we will lose a strong voice of support, especially for the EU integration and furthering Kosovo's path into EU accession. And I think it will, have an effect. But then on the other hand, though, we also still have many countries in EU which are really strong, or so to say, strong countries within EU that support Kosovo's path into EU. We still have strong friends. I don't want to, as a EU minister, I cannot really single out any of the countries, but we really do have many friends in EU which support us and want us to progress and to reform. But the way that I see it, I think that even within EU and EU members, there should be more unity for the region, for the Western Balkans, and specifically for Kosovo. Because we have seen that since financial crisis in 2008, there was this vacuum in the Western Balkans. And that led, geopolitics is geopolitics, and the powers will look ways to influence a region and to become an influencer in that region. And we have seen attempts in many of the countries of the region. And we're seeing these attempts still today, because the region, the Western Balkans, is, aligned and is working towards Euro-Atlantic integration. We have already few NATO members like Montenegro and Albania, and then the others aspiring to join. And then, obviously, that doesn't benefit, a certain a country, which EU must fill that gap and be really focused and be really serious about the Western Balkans and really have a presence, not only a presence, financial presence to support us with projects and programs and develop the countries and help us, reform, but then have also political presence. The more visits from the high officials in EU to the region, to the capitals of the 6 Western Balkan countries, it's a clear signal that we are here. And then the others, of course, will move away, because EU really does have this strong leverage in the world politics and world scene if they really want to talk, numbers and market potential and all that. So I think EU as well should, and we see this strategy as a new momentum that I think even EU is realizing that they should be more present, and this strategy kind of like puts forward this. But it really should now be implemented. So it shouldn't just stay a strategy in paper, it should be implemented, that the countries really see this EU perspective in place, unfolding, being implemented, and countries moving ahead.
Right. Kosovo has this Stabilization and Association Agreement with the EU, SAA. Each country in the region has had one of these. They've worked their way through it to the next step. Could you explain a little bit what it means exactly for Kosovo?
SAA, it's the first formal agreement that Kosovo has signed with the EU. So it's kind of like the first foundation or stepping stone to the other milestones that we need to reach. It has entered into force 2 years ago, specifically on October last year. We marked the second year. And it has 10 titles which basically foresee reforms in every aspect of our society, starting from rule of law to agriculture, education, health, public administration reform, many different aspects. Now it's up to us, obviously, how fast we want to. It has a frame of 10 years for implementation, but that doesn't necessarily stop the countries from moving further away in the other milestones. For example, some countries in the region have marked the 10th anniversary of SAA, but then that didn't prevent them to apply for candidate status, obtaining candidate status, opening negotiations, or moving further away in the process. And this is what we plan as well. 2018 should be seen as this rare window of opportunity, which is also coupled with the public statements of high EU officials, which say that the Western Balkans have a perspective. So the government is really focused and determined to do as much as we can during the 2018 and build this momentum, build up our credibility that we really want to work for EU integration and carry out the reforms, the laws that need to be reformed, and then apply for the candidacy status together and in coordination with the EU institutions. And why we're mentioning candidacy status? Because some argue that this is, really very ambitious for you guys. This is what it was said for the SAA as well. When we started years back, when we started mentioning SAA and that we want to start the negotiations and we want to sign the SAA, everybody was, but no, this is too much for you guys. This is too much. We will never achieve it. You will never be able to get it. You have the 5 non-recognizable, but we did it. Because we undertook the reforms that were necessary, we established the criteria that were necessary for the SAA, and we did it. And I think that coupled with political willingness and the reforms that we need to undertake, and then we really need to switch to gear 6, I would say, to speed up the reforms and catch up with other countries, then we can make it. And we can, obtain other milestones and further our integration process.
Well, because the document talks about several priority areas: rule of law, socio-economic development, transport, energy, connectivity, and so forth. How much can be achieved over the next, 3 years during the mandate of this government?
I think it can be achieved a lot. For example, for the rule of law, only in 2016 we have full ownership, so to say, in the sector of rule of law. We always had international community supporting us, and they had kind of like executive powers over rule of law and strengthening the rule of law. So I'm not shifting, blame here or trying to avoid responsibility, but since 2006 and even before 2016, sorry, and even before that, we had quite a lot of reforms. And then currently we're also undertaking lots of reforms. For the first time, we're going to conduct functional security rule of law sector review. which will really identify the challenges, but also address those challenges and establish checks and balances, which would ensure greater independency of or full independency of the judiciary, of the prosecution, which are also guaranteed with our constitution as well. But obviously, as a new country, we drafted the laws, and some of the laws we have seen now in implementation that they have loopholes, and we're working hard to close those loopholes so that we don't leave any room for misunderstanding or misuse of the articles in the law. We're reforming criminal code, we're reforming criminal procedure code, which will enable judges for more expedient trials and people for faster justice to be served. So then economically, Kosovo just last year was the fourth top performer according to the World Bank Doing Business report, the world top fourth performer, which in itself, it really marks that we are considerably really progressing. Now the new government has speeded up the dynamic. Since the beginning, we really have made decisions which will speed up this process, also the EU integration process in general, but also economic development. In terms of energy, you're probably aware that just about a month ago, we signed the biggest, largest contract, which would make and turn Kosovo into the largest energy producer, but also as to say regional energy power, so to say, the contract for building the new electricity power plant. So there are really very positive developments. We have a GDP growth of 4.5% on average, which even for last year has put Kosovo on top of the other regional countries of GDP growth. So there are really positive developments, but then of course there are challenges. We're just 10 years old.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, one of the Commission proposals is to increase funding for the pre-accession assistance, IPA, I think it's called, until 2020, without going into the figures. How will Kosovo benefit from this? What funding, what sectors, what impact?
Kosovo in generally has benefited greatly from the EU funds. Just from 2014 till 2020, so 2020, there is 674 million euros projected to be invested in different programs. The pre-accession instrument, IPA funds, and many different programs, bilateral or even just EU different projects. However, what we are seeing is that perhaps we should tweak a little bit, you know, the funding and the way that the funding is programmed, because we need to see more visibility, more really that we touch and we reform and we touch the lives of the people. Projects and the money from EU should really make people see that the improvements are happening. That is already happening, but I think here as well, you know, there's room for some improvement, better ownership, so to say, of the projects, and see where we lack capacities to divert those programs and projects in the areas where we haven't had sufficient funds, or especially in infrastructure and many different reforms in education, for example, or health, or there are many different sectors which have been underfunded, I would say, compared to some other sectors which have been flooded with funds.
Right. You know, with regard to the Commission itself, the President Juncker is planning to visit Prishtinë, I believe, by the end of the month. What do you expect from his visit?
This is a very good signal because it really marks the month of our 10th anniversary. It's on the eve or post celebration of the first jubilee, the first decade of our independence, and it's a good signal that EU is really considering the Western Balkans as a whole, and Kosovo is a part of the Western Balkans. For us, we view this as a really strong signal because it was President Juncker in his the first kind of like public statement that really provided this vision for EU enlargement in the Western Balkans came from President Juncker. So having President Juncker here and hearing the statements, assuring statements that Kosovo has a place in EU, the door has been opened, Of course, it will be another level of assurance even for us, the politicians, but also for the citizens. Because, right now we have a 90% support from the people for the EU integration process. And this should not fade away as the process goes on forward, because we understand that the process is very complex at times. It can be painful, the reforms that we will carry out, but then the people should understand that it's a long process. They may not see and reap the benefits right away, but it's a process that is being done for them, because all the reforms that we're doing, it's not necessarily that we need to do them, because Brussels is asking us to do it in order to join EU and that they are part of these acquis. But we need to do them to improve the welfare of the people, because EU integration really transforms the society for the better.
You should tell that to some of our friends in the current administration. We'll talk about that another time. But very last question, one that's of concern to all Kosovo citizens, the visa liberalization question. Where do things stand?
We have seen the new government is really committed to move this issue forward and find a solution that will bring to a close, a positive close, that is, so that we really enjoy finally the freedom of movement and visa liberalization. It's really a pity, unfortunately, that even after 2.5 years now, almost 3 years after the recommendation from the EU that Kosovo can enjoy freedom of movement upon ratification of border demarcation with Montenegro. And then we were still not able to do that. However, we see that the new government is really committed to find a solution which would be acceptable amongst everyone and bring an end to this issue and complete our obligation as well, because the way I see it, this is an internally, and it's not just the way I see it, but the way we see it in Kosovo, it's an internal issue. It's an internal political issue which we need to address as politicians, and we are doing the best to address it. Starting from the president, a speaker, prime minister, everyone is really invested to find a common solution so that we can ratify border demarcation as soon as possible. And besides, in the 10th anniversary of our independence, this would be really a strong guarantee of our border, because we are ensuring and securing our borders with a friendly country, because we do enjoy really friendly relations with Montenegro, and they were amongst the first countries in the region that recognized Kosovo's independence. So we would have 2 borders secured from NATO members, Albania and Montenegro, and then Macedonia as well, that is hopefully this year is also expecting an invitation from NATO to join you. So basically we would have, we will be bordered with 3 NATO members, and then the only remaining border issue would be with the final recognition. Right.
As you said, very good. As you said, that recognition is important not only for Kosovo's future with the European Union, but also for Kosovo's future with NATO and the transatlantic community. So it's a very important step. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I enjoyed very much talking to you. Thank you for joining me on the show, and for everybody, of course, happy 10th anniversary.
Thank you. Happy 10th anniversary to us, to everyone.
Unfortunately, we have already come to the end of today's show. I have greatly enjoyed being with you and my colleagues here at RTK. Good night, everyone. Stay healthy, be productive, and remain optimistic. See you all very soon. Mira Pavshim.